Consider the life of a man who spent 4 decades surviving everything the front lines could throw at him. From the brutal skirmishes of the War of 1812 to the treacherous terrains of the Black Hawk and Seminole Wars, Zachary Taylor seemed entirely indestructible. He earned the legendary moniker Old Rough and Ready because he chose to sleep in canvas tents alongside his soldiers, completely indifferent to flying bullets, severe malaria, or hostile territory. Yet, this American Titan would ultimately meet his end inside the relative safety of the White House. He didn't fall to a rebel ambush or a political assassin's bullet. Instead, his entire presidency was dismantled after a routine summer snack of fruit and a pitcher of cream. It sounds like a dark historical absurdity, but there is a profoundly chilling logic behind how a common refreshment effectively altered American history. The true danger, however, lay not in the menu itself, but in the devastating lack of mid-19th century sanitation and the medical chaos that followed it. If you love dark presidential mysteries that history books try to gloss over, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We break down the strangest, untold chapters of human history every single week, and the truth behind this White House tragedy is about to get incredibly complex. To understand the ground zero of this bizarre medical tragedy, we have to look at Washington, D.C., in July of 1850. The Capitol was effectively built on a humid swamp, radiating a suffocating summer heat wave that turned the city's dirt roads into ovens. Crucially, the city lacked any modern sewage system. Raw waste routinely contaminated the local water supply, creating ideal conditions for dangerous bacteria to spread through the city's food and drinking water. Zachary Taylor, the 12th President of the United States, was never a man built for the polished, fragile world of politics. He routinely wore a battered straw hat, despised the rigid formality of high society, and possessed the blunt, uncompromising temperament of a seasoned battlefield commander. On July 4th, duty required the aging president to attend a massive Independence Day celebration at the grounds of the newly constructing Washington Monument. For hours, Taylor sat exposed to the blistering midday sun, forced to endure endless, dry political orations. By the time he finally returned to the executive mansion, he was severely dehydrated, sun-baked, and desperate for physical relief. Bypassing standard refreshments, the president ordered a massive quantity of fresh cherries and a large stoneware pitcher of ice-cold milk. Seeking immediate comfort, he consumed bowl after bowl of the fruit, washing it down with the thick cream. To an exhausted man in the heat of summer, it felt like the perfect remedy. However, within a matter of hours, that remedy proved disastrous. Agonizing stomach cramps began tearing through his abdomen. By midnight, a violent, burning fever had taken hold, leaving the president completely incapacitated. What had begun as an ordinary attempt to cool down had rapidly thrown the White House into crisis. Modern historians largely agree that the cherries and milk themselves weren't inherently poisonous. Instead, they were almost certainly the vehicle for a severe gastrointestinal infection caused by contaminated food or water. Historians have proposed illnesses ranging from cholera to typhoid fever, but no definitive diagnosis has ever been established. In the modern world, a severe case of gastrointestinal infection is treated with hydration, rest, and careful monitoring. But in 1850, the medical community operated under a completely different, often terrifying logic. Modern germ theory did not exist. Doctors did not wash their hands, instruments were entirely unsterilized, and the prevailing school of thought relied on a practice known as heroic medicine. The core philosophy was as brutal as it was flawed. If a patient is dangerously ill, the physician must violently shock the body until the sickness is forced to leave. When the nation's top medical minds arrived at Taylor's bedside, their intervention inadvertently accelerated the disaster. Observing the president's severe abdominal pain, they decided to draw the internal inflammation outward by applying chemical irritants directly to his skin, creating massive, painful blisters across his stomach. When the blistering failed to yield results, the doctors escalated their treatment. They forced the severely dehydrated, vomiting president to ingest heavy doses of calomel. Calomel contained mercury, and while it was a standard treatment at the time, modern medicine recognizes that repeated doses could be dangerously toxic, especially for a patient already weakened by severe dehydration. To combat the blinding pain, the physicians then administered massive, unregulated amounts of pure opium. By modern standards, many of these aggressive treatments almost certainly worsened his already fragile condition. Rather than providing fluids to a man desperately losing them, the finest doctors in America spent 5 agonizing days blistering his skin, administering toxic compounds to his system, and heavily sedating him, all while operating under the absolute certainty of 19th century science. On July 9, 1850, President Zachary Taylor took his final breath. As the country mourned, whispers of a sinister conspiracy immediately began to echo through the corridors of Washington. Many refused to believe that a bacterial infection from a summer meal could kill a man as durable as Taylor. The political timing of his death was simply too perfect to ignore. The United States was sitting on an absolute powder keg, on the verge of splitting into a bloody civil war over the expansion of slavery into new Western territories. Because Taylor was a wealthy slaveholder from the South, pro-slavery leaders assumed he would champion their cause. Instead, Taylor fiercely defended the Union. He reportedly declared that if any Southern state attempted to secede, he would personally lead the army down south and hang them for treason. He was a massive, immovable obstacle to the Southern agenda. When he suddenly dropped dead, his vice president, who proved far more willing to compromise with Southern leaders, took the oath of office and immediately signed concessions that favored the South. The symptoms of Taylor's violent illness, severe cramping, vomiting, and rapid decline, closely resembled those of acute arsenic poisoning. Did an assassin slip a lethal chemical dose into his midnight cream? The rumor persisted for over a century, growing so loud that in 1991, historians and forensic scientists received permission to do the unthinkable: exhume the body of Zachary Taylor from his Kentucky vault. Scientists removed fragments of his hair and fingernails, subjecting them to advanced nuclear testing to search for permanent traces of arsenic. The twist in the investigation was profound. Arsenic was indeed present in his system. However, the forensic analysis revealed that the levels were entirely consistent with ordinary 19th century life, where arsenic routinely contaminated well water and everyday household goods. The levels were hundreds of times too low to be lethal. There was no political assassin. Zachary Taylor had truly been defeated by a devastating combination of invisible bacteria, contaminated capital infrastructure, and a medical team whose well-intentioned cures were likely deadlier than the disease itself. It turns out, you don't need a shadow government or a master assassin to completely change the course of global politics. Sometimes, all it takes is a scorching summer afternoon, contaminated food or water, and the primitive state of 19th century sanitation. We look back at 1850 and shake our heads at their terrible medical choices, but every generation is convinced it understands the world better than the last. History has a way of reminding us that absolute certainty can be dangerous. Which leaves a pretty fascinating debate for the comment section. If you were a historic leader, would you rather go down in a blaze of glory on a battlefield, or have your entire legacy permanently associated with a deadly White House snack? Drop your thoughts below. I'm replying to the best answers. If you want to see what happens when human error and historical accidents collide in ways that are even more chaotic than a lethal presidential dinner, click on the video on your screen right now as we dive into our next historical deep dive.